All right, take a look at this. What happened when Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was speaking at an event in New Hampshire. This is the things that you get used to if you do decide to run for president. This kind of stuff happens a lot out there on the campaign trail. A protester up on stage. This was in New Hampshire over the weekend, and they got in there pretty quick and got them out of there. Security pretty active on the scene there, and the governor sort of, you know, kind of made a little bit light of it. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that happens when it gets a little spicy up there, I think he said. So he's not officially running yet, not in the race yet, but we are starting to see some pretty strong ads on both sides of the Trump-DeSantis equation. Watch this.
Ron DeSantis loves sticking his fingers where they don't belong. And we're not just talking about pudding.
Trump should fight Democrats, not lie about Governor DeSantis. What happened to Donald Trump?
Okay. Meanwhile, listen to President Biden when he was asked, got a little irritated when he was asked again when he's going to make a decision about 24.
So you made a decision? You just have to announce it?
I told you my plan is to run again.
A little bit testy there. Let's bring in Karl Rove, former deputy chief of staff for President George W. Bush, co-founder of American Crossroads, and a Fox News contributor. He's watched many of these processes play out over the years. Karl, it's great to have you with us today. So it looks like these two are running head-to-head, even though Governor DeSantis has not put his hat in the ring quite yet, Karl.
Well, I think that's right. I was mystified, frankly, by the Trump ad. Not too many people have heard the rumor that Governor DeSantis once ate some pudding with his fingers. I mean, I think we probably tripled the number of people who've heard that in just simply this exchange between you and me. But I thought it was also, though, a key sign that Trump is worried about DeSantis, and I thought DeSantis's reply was better because it was about substantive issues and about Trump's record in office. We'll see how this all plays out, but it's clear we've got two boxers who are willing to go at it in the match.
Yeah, it seems a little bit silly season. He said, you know, he doesn't remember that ever happening unless maybe when he was a kid. But it's certainly, there's a lot of important things on the people's minds as they look towards this. This is from today. Governor DeSantis sort of shutting down a reporter when he was asked about some of the GOP senators who are now supporting President Trump. Watch this.
Governor, can you tell me, are you surprised that former President Trump lined up 9 Senate Republicans?
Look, I mean, this is a big announcement. I mean, like, honestly, you're asking me about political process. I mean, why don't we focus on this issue at hand?
So obviously he wants to stick to the event of the day there. Does it matter that some of these Florida legislature folks are peeling off and supporting the former president, who's also a Florida resident?
Yeah, well, look, if you're running, you like to have all the people of your home state for you, but since President Trump now is a registered voter in Florida, Governor DeSantis has got to know he's not going to have that support. So endorsements matter. Let's see how much they matter. What's amazing is that the endorsements for President Trump are not universal. I mean, that is to say, he doesn't have every Florida legislator. He doesn't even have, you know, today they put out both Tennessee senators and 3 of the state's Republican Congress members endorsed Trump, but there are several others who didn't. So you'd think the former president would you know, sort of reap almost universal approval from elected office holders, but apparently not. So it's helpful for him to do it. It's not necessarily a show of strength, and I think DeSantis probably got to find a more happy way to sort of dismiss those kind of things, because they are going to ask him political questions at non-political events.
Yeah, interesting. You know, there are some donors who say that they're going to stay on the sidelines for a little while. There was a lot of early money going into the DeSantis camp, and now they're kind of watching it a little bit more closely as they see some of these polls come in. You know, but what do you say to those who look at the Florida governor, who clearly was the early person who was seen as the person who potentially could beat the former president, who say, oh, you know, he needs to get in now, he needs to get more aggressive, he can't be on the sidelines at this point, he's got to get in?
No, I disagree. I mean, and maybe it's because of personal experience. Governor George W. Bush of Texas filed an exploratory committee in March, made no statements about the potential run for the presidency until he entered the race in June. And that was pre, you know, internet. That was pre, you know, social media. That was pre how campaigns have been sped up by all the new technology that's available to him. So I think Governor DeSantis is wise in staying out of the race and being governor longer. He's got a legislative session that's going a little bit more. And after that, then he ought to make a decision and get in at a time of his choosing. But the idea that simply because Donald Trump got into the race last year means that everybody else needs to get into the race early this year, that just is not the way that the world works, nor need it work that way.
So let's talk a little bit about President Biden. We saw the comment that he made. He was a little bit testy, I guess. He keeps getting asked, obviously, when he's going to get in. There's some suggestion that he might make sort of a low-key announcement on April 25th, which is the same date that he announced his last election campaign on. And a lot of heat that he's getting about not talking more to the press. Let's put this screen up that shows the presidential news conferences, because obviously he's got the bully pulpit, and he's got, when he hasn't announced he's running, he's got a real opportunity to speak out as president, but he's not taking advantage of it very often, Karl, when you take a look at these numbers across the board. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, he again doesn't need to get in now. But like DeSantis, he ought to come up with a better way to dismiss it and move on. But you're absolutely right. The longer he's president, the shorter the time he's a candidate, and the more he commands the bully pulpit as our president. And you're right. The fact that he doesn't have news conferences. Think about this. I cannot remember a visit by a U.S. president to a foreign country, particularly one where he's staying 4 or 5 days, in which there was not at least a formal news conference between the leader of that country and the president of the United States, in which they took a couple of questions from that country's press corps and from the president's traveling press corps. Why not? And I think the explanation is easy. They know that the president is suffering, and they worry about putting him in too many places with unscripted questions and therefore unscripted answers. And so I think it's a sign of weakness on the part of the president that he doesn't do it. He is the president. He should have the bully pulpit, and his failure to use that is indicative of, I think, a concern by his team that he's just simply not up to doing that on a regular basis. And that's problematic if you're asking at the age of what he will be, almost 82, to be reelected as president for 4 years, in which, if he serves all 4 years, he'll be closer to 90 than he is to 80.
He has really dismal approval numbers right now on pretty much every category. And I think you're right. It's hard to imagine any other reason that they don't put him out there than that they are concerned. He does often sort of garble his words and say weird things, like we're going to go out there and lick him, when he was talking for a few moments in Ireland in what was really termed like a 4-day stretch without a lot of business. Mitch McConnell has returned to the Senate, Karl, and we're going to listen in as he makes his opening statement, the Senate Minority Leader.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.